Hi. So I want to discuss Atlas of the Heart. Sometime late last year, my coach recommended that I read this book, and she recommended it because I was, trying to understand connections, relationships, because I am a relationship coach. I have a certification. And she swore by this book. She said that if I really wanted to understand people, wanted to understand relationships, and help people in their relationships, I needed to read this book. But because of the region I live, I couldn't find it in an audiobook because I'm an audiobook girl. So I had to on and get someone to deliver, etc., and so forth. So to keep myself accountable, because like I said, naturally I'm not your typical physical book girl. I'm an audiobook girl. I decided to do it online to keep myself accountable. Accountable reading Atlas of the Heart. So I would read a chapter live and then discuss my thoughts on it. And I think if I do it this way, it will make me a lot more accountable to myself, to my reading, to my growth, and what I want to achieve from this. Okay, let's dive into chapter one. Before this recording, I had read the introduction, but there's something in the introduction that stuck out to me. There's just this paragraph. I'll just read it out briefly, and then we'll proceed to chapter one. Yeah, she was talking about like what led her to this point, how she started out, her family background and all before we got to this. And this stood out for me because she was talking about people's use of language. Like if you do not have the right language to express your emotions and yourself, then we clearly do have a problem. You have a communication struggle with is, you know, communication. Because if I'm speaking Dutch and you're speaking, Indian or Pakistani, we definitely cannot understand ourselves. If the word to express pain in my language is different from pain in your language, we will not be able to understand each other. She gave an example in the introduction as well, where they ran a research on people to describe the different feelings they felt, and the most common words that came up was happy, sad, angry. And you and I know that there are a lot of words that are used to express pain, express discomfort, but people's easy go-to word is happy, sad, angry, happy, sad, mad. And there is a lot of language to express it, because if I tell you I'm mad, there is a degree of me being mad or angry is different. If I say I'm sad, am I tearful sad? Am I depressed sad? There's a range of language, if you understand what I mean. Anyway, so let me quickly read this part of the book. She said, I also learned that when you hold someone accountable for hurtful behavior and they feel shame, that's not the same as shame. I am responsible for holding you accountable in a respectful and productive way. I'm not responsible for your emotional reaction to that accountability. Sadly, I've also learned that sometimes pain takes your breath away. You have to let the people you love experience the consequences of their own behavior. That one really hurts, right? And it struck me because my personality is one who likes to protect. I have like a protective personality in that I try to shield the people that I love from pain. If I could absorb the pain on your behalf, I will absorb it. My typical go-to behavior is to keep the peace, right? And if you are to suffer the consequence of whatever decision or action you've taken, I would find a way to make you not experience that. But growth, both personal and the growth of the people around you, requires that you allow them to feel what needs to be felt and learn what needs to be learned. because it's in that process that they grow and they too learn the lessons of the things that they should do and the things that they should stop doing. Right? So I go into chapter 1 now. So that just stood out for me because it hit me on a totally different level. And it made me realize that, oh yeah, I am actually growing and I'm not alone in that experience. Okay, so chapter 1, the title is Places We Go When Things Are Uncertain. So this chapter is talking about stress, overwhelm, anxiety, worry, and excitement, dread, fear, vulnerability. And just reading out the words here, I know that I struggled with when I am uncertain with things, my easy go-to avoidance and sometimes worry. So I oscillate between anxiety, worry, and avoidance, right? And then a little drizzle of fear, depending on the magnitude of the uncertainty. A lot of us, we find ourselves in this particular these emotions from time to time. And that's why I think it's a very, very powerful way to start the book, right? So let's go into it. Stressed and overwhelmed, yeah? The restaurant is packed. It's loud. Every table is full and people are lined up out the door. Unless you don't want us to pay for this crappy service. You can hear the kitchen manager's booming voice through the swinging doors. The food on the table is dying. Let's go, let's go. We've got desserts ready for table 10 and bread ready for tables 3, 4, and 8. But only one waiter showed up for the shift, and it's me. And I can't speak for some reason, and I'm wearing a bathing suit and huge fins that make it hard to walk and impossible to run. This is one of my least favorite reoccurring bad dreams. I hate it because after 6 years of waiting tables and bartending for a high pressure, high expectation restaurant group through college and grad school, I know that feeling all too well. We made a lot of money, but we worked our asses off and the pressure left a mark. Still today, if Steve is in the kitchen and I walk behind him, I'll shout, "Behind you!" And if I spy someone leaning against the counter during a family kitchen, blown. Back in the day, if I walked into the kitchen and blown. Back in the day, if I walked into the kitchen and told another waiter I'm in the weeds, the response would be, "What? Can you take bread to table 2 and 4? Or retea tables 3 and 5, please?" Being in the weeds and pulling out the weeds happens to everyone on almost every shift. It was just part of the job and you learned to manage it. Walking into the kitchen and saying, "I'm blown," well, that's completely different. The kitchen gets really quiet. No one asks what you need. Normally, someone runs to the hostess stand to find out what tables you are running that shift. They don't even assume you know at this point. The kitchen manager, who would never get involved in an in-the-weeds situation, pulls out the tickets for your guests to evaluate what's happening and immediately reassigns your table to another waiter staff. When you are blown, you can either step outside or into the cooler or go to the bathroom and cry. Whatever you need, you're expected back in 10 minutes, ready to go. But for 10 minutes, there's a complete takeover. In 6 years, it happened to me twice, both times due to pure exhaustion at the end of triple shifts that I was working because tuition was due. Stressed is being in the weeds. Overwhelmed is being blown. Stressed. We feel stressed when we evaluate environmental demand as beyond our capability to cope successfully. This includes elements of unpredictability, uncontrollability, and feeling overloaded. Stressful situations cause both physiological, as body, and psychological, mind and emotion reactions. However, regardless of how strongly our body responds to stress, increases in heart rate and cortisol, our emotional reactions is more tied to our cognitive assessment of whether we can cope. with the situation, how we can cope with the situation than to how our body is reacting. I found this really interesting because I always assumed that my emotions responded to my body freaking out. But really, my emotions are responding to my thinking assessment of how well I can handle something. Just as getting in and out of the weeds is a part of every wait staff shift in a restaurant, navigating stressors is a daily part of living. However, daily stress can take a toll. In fact, chronic exposure to stressors can be detrimental to health. High levels of perceived stress have been shown to correlate with more rapid aging, decreased immune function, greater inflammatory processes, less sleep, and poorer health behaviors. Overwhelmed. If stress is like being in the weeds, feeling overwhelmed is like being blown. Overwhelmed means an extreme level of stress, an emotional and or cognitive intensity to the point of feeling unable to function. I love this definition of overwhelmed from the Merriam-Webster online dictionary. Completely overcome or overpowered by thought or feeling. We all know that feeling that washes over us and leaves us completely unsure of what to do next. Even when people say, "How can I help?" or what needs to be done, responding with organized thoughts feels impossible. This is also when I can get really crappy and think to myself, if I had the wherewithal to figure out what comes next and how we need to approach all of this, I wouldn't be walking around in circles crying and talking to myself. Feeling stressed and feeling overwhelmed seem to be related to our perception of how we are coping with our current situation and our ability to handle the accompanying emotions. Am I coping? Can I handle this? Am I inching towards the quicksand? John Kabat-Zinn describes overwhelm as the all too common feeling that our lives are somehow unfolding faster than the human nervous system and psyche are able to manage well. This really resonates with me. It's all unfolding faster than my nervous system and psyche can manage. When I read that, Kabat-Zinn suggests that mindful play or no agenda, non-doing time is the cure for overwhelm. It made sense to me why. When we are blown at a restaurant, we weren't asked to help problem solve the situation. We were just asked to engage in non-doing. I'm sure experience taught the managers that doing nothing was the only way back for someone totally overwhelmed. The non-doing also makes sense. There is a body of research that indicates that we don't process other emotional information accurately when we feel overwhelmed, and this can result in poor decision making. In fact, researcher Carol Gom used the term overwhelm to describe an experience where our emotions are intense, our focus on them is moderate, and our clarity about exactly what we are feeling is low enough that we get confused when trying to identify or describe the emotions. In other words, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm feeling my emotions at about 10. I'm paying attention to them about 5, and I understand them at about 2. This is not a setup for successful decision making. The big learning here is that feeling both stressed and overwhelmed is about our narrative of emotional and mental depletion. There's just too much going on to manage effectively. Agreed. I'll just pause here a bit. When I think about what I just read in terms of stress and being overwhelmed, it does resonate, because when we do feel like we are at that melting point of an activity or of a situation that is overcoming us at that particular time, our reasoning faculties are not really, on point. There's something that TG Jakes used to say. He said, never make a decision when you are angry, when you are tired, when you are stressed. I don't know if it's TD Jake that said it, but I think it was him. Because when you are in those emotional heights, you are not processing your emotions accurately. And that's what Brené is telling us. You are not processing your emotions accurately. You can make the wrong decisions. You can say the wrong thing. Especially imagine being stressed and overwhelmed, and your partner, your family member, your child, or anyone within your space is asking you to make a life or death decision. Maybe they're asking you to make a commitment to a certain financial situation, or pay for something that has to do with a life or death situation, or make a decision about maybe changing schools, taking someone over life support, or something that's incredible. The stress and the pressure, you cannot process that adequately, because the truth of the matter will be that when you are down from that high, emotional high, and you can reason properly, when you evaluate the decisions that you have made at that particular time, you will kick yourself and ask yourself, why didn't I just wait? Why didn't I just wait to make decision? Because you may have made the wrong decision, or you'd have even made things worse, either by your body language, the way you snap, the way you respond, or your shit tunnel. I'm sorry. There's a frightening scene. So sorry. There's a frightening scene in the original Willy Wonka film that starts out as a sweet boat ride through a magical land of supersized candy and turns into an escalating scene of fear and loss of control. As the boss enters a dark tunnel, the mood turns. The boat starts going faster and faster while terrible images flash on the walls, including a close-up of a millipede crawling over someone's face, a chicken getting its head cut off, and a lizard eating a bug. None of it makes narrative sense. It's just scary and confusing. All of this is happening while the passengers, children, and their parents are freaking out, and Willy Wonka, played by the incredible wild-eyed Gene Wilder, is manically reciting this poem at an increasingly frantic rate. I'm not even going to attempt to recite the poem at the frantic rate that was described, but I'll just read it. There's no earthly way of knowing which direction we are going. There's no knowing where we're rowing or which way the river's flowing. Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is a hurricane a blowing? Not a speck of light is showing, so the danger must be growing. Are the fires of hell a glowing? Is the grizzly reaper mowing? Yes, the danger must be growing, for the rowers keep on rowing, and they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing. That's what anxiety feels like to me. Escalating loss of control, worst case scenario, thinking and imagery, and total uncertainty. Let me off the boat. As the team and I reviewed the research, what I learned about language and how some of these experiences work together felt like a life jacket for me. Something that would keep me afloat if I had to jump off that boat before it headed into the shit tunnel. I hope it does for you too. You are afraid of surrender because you don't want to lose control, but you never had control. All you had was anxiety. That's a quote by a writer, Elizabeth Gilbert. The image is in the book. The American Psychological Association defines anxiety as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. Anxiety can be both a state and a trait. To better understand this, let's get clear on what these terms mean. The best explanation I've come across is from the Oxford Review Encyclopedia of Terms. Here's how they explain it. A trait is considered to be something that is part of an individual's personality and therefore a long-term characteristic of an individual that shows through their behavior, actions, and feelings. It is seen as being a characteristic, feature, or quality of an individual. For example, someone can say, I am a confident person, or I am just an anxious person. Is stating that these attributes are part of who they are. A state, on the other hand, is a temporary condition that they are experiencing for a short period of time. After the state has passed, they will return to another condition. For example, someone who says, I am feeling quite confident about this interview, or I feel nervous about doing this, is describing states. I love their closing sentence, which may be the understatement of the decade. However, working out what is really a trait and what is a state can often be difficult and is the content of much scientific argument at times. So when we say that anxiety can be both a state and a trait, it means that some of us feel anxious mainly in response to certain situations, while some of us can be naturally more predisposed to anxiety than others. Generalized anxiety disorder is different from both trait and state anxiety. According to Johns Hopkins Medicine, generalized anxiety disorder is a condition of excessive worry about everyday issues and situations. It lasts longer than 6 months, and in addition of feeling worried, you may also feel restlessness, fatigue, trouble concentrating, irritability, increased muscle tension, and trouble sleeping. Approximately 1/3 of US adults will be affected by an anxiety disorder in their lifetime. However, it is estimated that fewer than half of people with diagnosable anxiety disorders seek any type of professional treatment. It's very difficult to walk through an anxiety disorder without professional help. I'll describe myself as having frequent state anxiety with trait rising. And I know that therapy has been essential for me in terms of recognizing and understanding my reactions and developing techniques for working through my feelings of anxiety. I've also had to give up caffeine, commit to 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and exercise almost every day. An intolerance for uncertainty is an important contributing factor to all types of anxiety. Those of us who are generally uncomfortable with uncertainty are more likely to experience anxiety in specific situations, as well as to have trait anxiety and anxiety disorders. Our anxiety often leads to one of two coping mechanisms: worry or avoidance. Unfortunately, neither of these coping strategies is very effective. Worrying and anxiety go together, but worry is not an emotion. It's the thinking part of anxiety. Worry is described as a chain of negative thoughts about bad things that might happen in the future. What really got me about the worry research is that those of us with a tendency to worry believe it is helpful for coping. It is not. Believe it is uncontrollable, which means we don't try to stop worrying and try to suppress worry thoughts, which actually strengthens and reinforces worry. I'm not suggesting that we worry about worry, but it's helpful to recognize that worrying is not a helpful coping mechanism, that we absolutely can learn how to control it, and that rather than suppressing worry, we need to dig into and address the emotion driving the thinking. Okay. Avoidance, the second coping strategy for anxiety, is not showing up and often spending a lot of energy zigzagging around and away from the thing that already feels like it's consuming us. And as an avoidance isn't benign, it can hurt us, hurt other people, and lead to increased and mounting anxiety. In her book, The Dance of Fear, Dr. Harriet Lerner writes, "It is not fear that stops you from doing the brave and true thing in your daily life. Rather, the problem is avoidance. You want to feel comfortable, so you avoid doing or saying the thing that will evoke fear and other difficult emotions. Avoidance will make you feel less vulnerable in the short run, but it will never make you feel less afraid." The entire premise of this book is that language has the power to define our experiences, and there's no better example of this than anxiety and excitement. Anxiety and excitement feel the same, but how we interpret and label them can determine how we experience them. Even though excitement is described as an energized state of enthusiasm leading up to or during an enjoyable activity, it doesn't always feel great. We can get the same coming out of our skin feeling that we experience when we are feeling anxious. Similar sensations are labeled anxiety when we perceive them negatively and excitement when we perceive them positively. One important strategy when we are in these feelings is to take a deep breath and try to determine whether we are feeling anxious or excitement. Researchers found that labeling the emotion as excitement seems to hinge on interpreting the bodily sensations as positive. The labels are important because they help us know what to do next. Dread occurs frequently in response to high probability negative events. Its magnitude increases as the dreaded event draws near, because dread makes an anticipated negative event even worse. We often prefer to get unpleasant things over with quickly, even if doing them sooner means that they will be more unpleasant. Example, a more pleasant procedure now is preferred to a more painful procedure later. I felt so called out when I read this. I can convince myself that an experience is going to be disastrous and walk myself into a dread frenzy. It's terrible because even if it goes well, I'm so dread exhausted that I can't enjoy it. True, I agree. For anxiety and dread, the threat is in the future. For fear, the threat is now in the present. Fear is a negative, short-lasting, high-alert emotion in response to a perceived threat. And like anxiety, it can be measured in a state of trait. Some people have a higher propensity to experience fear than others. Fear arises when we need to respond quickly to physical or psychological danger that is present and imminent, because fear is a rapid-fire emotion. The physiological reaction can sometimes occur before we even realize that we are afraid. The typical responses are fight, flight, or freeze. In the research, you can find many lists of what elicits fear in us. The items range from rodents and snakes to the inability to see our surroundings to observing our children in peril. However, no matter how much the list varies, one item is on every list I've seen: the fear of social rejection. We can never forget that we experience social pain and physical pain in the same part of our brains, and the potential exposure to either type of pain drives fear. To close this session, I want to go back to my friend and mentor, Dr. Harriet Lena. She writes, "Throughout evolutionary history, anxiety and fear have helped every species to be wary and to survive. Fear can signal us to act or alternatively to resist the impulse to act. It can help us to make wise, self-protective choices in and out of relationships where we might otherwise sail mindlessly along, ignoring signs of trouble. Like all of the experiences in this book, both our anxiety and our fear need to be understood and respected, perhaps even befriended. We need to pull up a chair and sit with them, understand why they are showing up, and ask ourselves what there is to learn. Dismissing fear and anxiety is not useful to our quest for connection. Is as dangerous. Dismissing fear and anxiety as not useful to our quest for connection is as dangerous as choosing to live in constant fear and anxiety." Okay. That was a long read, but quite insightful, because I won't say I'm an anxious person. But I will say that I do have anxiety states. Yeah, yes, that's how it was defined, as state of anxiety, where I feel confident about certain things. I feel anxious about certain things, but I don't think I have traits. But I do label myself and identify as someone who is not comfortable with uncertainty and things that are outside of my control. I'm seriously working on that, and I've been working on that for years. When things are out of my control, I begin to panic. So probably, yeah, I have traits of anxiety according to the book. And I noticed, because when she mentioned in the book that anxiety and excitement can be confused at the same time because it increases your heart rate and it makes you feel a certain way. And the way to understand if you are excited or anxious is by questioning, your body state, your emotions and your reactions at that particular time. I remember like 2 days ago, I was at work and my heart rate just started beating, and I was like, I'm surprised because it kind of like connects with what I just read. My heart just started beating, and I was like, what's happening? What's going on? What has changed? Because I was working on my computer, and then all of a sudden I just started feeling palpitations. Like, what's happening? What did I read? What did I see? What just happened? My body just went into an anxious state, and I had to take some time to call myself back and start asking questions. Okay, so what did I read? I went back to check the things I was looking at. Did I read something that triggered me? Did I miss a deadline? Did I get a text? What happened within this space of 10 minutes that has put me in this state? And I had to take time out. So maybe that when we're talking about being overwhelmed and being blown and things like that, it looks like I'm already practicing some of the things that the book is saying. I took that time out and I self-reflected and I asked myself questions. Okay, what did I see? What did I spot? Why am I feeling this way? And I was able to track it down, and I was like, so this was what triggered it. And when I really looked at it and drilled down, it didn't really seem as significant and as worrying as I felt at the time. So I talked myself out of it. I prayed and listened to some calming music, and the feeling left. So I guess what the chapter is trying to say is, again, we need to understand the language we use to interpret ourselves. Some people call themselves anxious people, but if you really drill down and look at it, as she said, you may have states of anxiety, meaning that certain situations make you anxious, certain situations make you uncomfortable, and it lasts like maybe an hour or so, a day, and then you've moved on, because when you've done the thing, you've encountered it, you've moved on, and then you're back to regular programming. But if you are an anxious person, meaning that you have an anxious disorder, that means you perpetually live in that space. You are always anxious. You are always fearful. You're always dreading and worrying about things that are totally out of your control. And I think I understand why she says we should sit with it and identify it, because it's in the identifying and in the understanding that we can tackle whatever problems or the things that may be arising in our circle, in our life part-time. I used to be a worrier, and I think what has helped me overcome that is when I look at situations, I start, going down that rabbit hole and spiraling, I call myself and I ask myself one question. Sometimes there are multiple, but the one question is, do you have the power to change this right now? And I have to be honest with myself in that moment. And when I ask myself that, if I have the power to change it, next question is, what are you going to do to change it? But if I do not have the power to change it, I tell myself, so why are you worrying about it? It's out of your control. It's out of your hands. And I remember this feeling. You remember when we used to write exams in school, when you've written an exam and you've come out of the hall and you're checking at the answers and you have dread and you're dreadful and you're worried and you are afraid and you are angry, you have anxiety. It's that kind of feeling, because you've written the paper, you've submitted it. There's nothing that can happen. There's no miracle that can happen. You've submitted your paper, you've written the exam. Whatever grade you get is based on whatever it is you wrote. But if you see a lot of people after they come out of exams, they're checking their notes, they're, wanting to see if they got all the answers right and living in dread and fear. And it's in those things that we dwell on, the activities we dwell on, that sometimes amplifies the dread, the fear, and the anxiety. And I'm beginning to understand what she's saying, because that's practical life. That's what we do. You've done something that is totally out of your control, that you have no control over. It's done, it's dusted. You've written an exam, you've applied for whatever it is. You can't take it back. It's out of your control. It's in the hand of God's. It's in the hand of God right now for him to do whatever it is, and the hand of whoever it is that's going to see your paper or see whatever it is you've submitted. So the question is, why stay in that state of worry, dread, when you cannot control it? And I encourage you to try my method. And when you find yourself spiraling, is this out of my control? Do I have control over this? If I do, what can I do to change it? If I don't, what will my worrying solve? And sometimes, every time I find myself there and I ask myself those questions, I'm able to stop and pull myself back and say, oh, no, it's out of my control. Let's focus on something. And I don't say it's easy. I deliberately try to think of something else. So she was saying something about they're not telling you to worry about the worry, because it's in the worrying about the worry that you become a little more distraught. It's in acceptance. I think it's the word is acceptance. Accepting that I've done the best that I can. I've done what it is that I can do for this particular thing. The rest is left to the universe, to God, or to whoever it is that has the final say. And I move on to something else. If you find your mind going back, yes, your mind will go back, but you need to practice the act of pulling yourself back out of that rabbit hole that your mind wants to go off. Do not deceive yourself by saying, I'm not going to worry about it, and just say, oh, I'm not going to worry about it, but internally you're worrying. No, it's about making peace with it. You need to actually make peace with it. And that way you can move on to something else. And then there's something else before we go into the final part of this particular chapter on vulnerability. She talked about avoidance. Oh my God, I used to be an avoider. I used to avoid anything that would rock the boat, that will cause a problem, and will cause animosity. I liked to follow peace. I was the peacemaker in my relationships, in my work, and everything. Joy was the girl that everybody liked because she didn't like trouble. She didn't like problem. If there was anything that was going to cause problem, I will avoid it. And sometimes to this day, there are some things that I put off because I just don't want to deal with it right now. I will not lie, I'm not perfect. I think up until last week or last 2 weeks, there was something that I kept putting off. But I had to tell myself, if you don't do it, nobody else will. No matter how much you avoid this, it's still going to come back. You just have to face it. And avoidance is something that we do when we are afraid of the outcome. We do not know how it's going to turn out. We do not know how we will be perceived. We do not know how people will react to whatever it is that we are doing. Yeah, I feel very called out right now because she's really nailing the things that I have struggled with and I'm still working on myself to overcome. Avoidance, anxiety, worry, being fearful about things that are out of my control and wanting to be able to control everything so that it fits into this tiny square box and life goes as planned. But life doesn't always go as planned. Okay, so the next part of the chapter, while wrapping up very soon, is vulnerability. Vulnerability. Vulnerability is the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It first emerged in my dissertation research, and it has been validated by every study I've ever done since. Through our research and training, we've asked tens of thousands of people to give us examples of vulnerability from their own lives. These are a few of the answers that directly pierce the emotion. The first date after my divorce, talking about race with my team, trying to get pregnant after my second miscarriage, talking about my feelings, starting my own business, watching my child leave for college, Remembering that leaders don't have all the answers but ask important questions. Apologizing to a colleague about how I spoke to him in a meeting. Sending my son to orchestra practice, knowing how badly he wants to make first chair and knowing there's a really good chance he will not make the orchestra at all. Waiting for the doctor to call back, giving and getting feedback. Getting back to bat after striking out. While these are uncomfortable and difficult experiences, there is no evidence that they are indicators of weakness. In fact, this is one of the biggest myths of vulnerability. We found that across culture, most of us were raised to believe that being vulnerable is being weak. This sets up an unsolvable tension for most of us because we were also raised to be brave. There is no courage without vulnerability. Courage requires the willingness to lean into uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. In my most recent research on courage and leadership, the ability to embrace vulnerability emerged as the prerequisite for all of the daring leadership behaviors. If we can't handle uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure in a way that aligns with our values and furthers our organizational goals, we can't lead. In a world where perfectionism, pleasing, and proving are used as armor to protect our egos and our feelings, it takes a lot of courage to show up and be all in when we can't control the outcome. It also takes discipline and self-awareness to understand what to share and with whom. Vulnerability is not oversharing. It's sharing with people who have earned the right to hear our stories and our experiences. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. And that's the end of chapter 1. Oh my God. I don't know why as I was reading this, I felt a little emotional because vulnerability is something that I struggle with a lot. And some of the things that she read here, like the first date after my divorce, that struck me because like the first date after my breakup, oh my God, I think I came home that day and cried because I was so emotional. It felt like exposure. It felt like finally admitting that I was a failure, that my relationship ended at that particular time. It was, oh God. And I felt like I was on exhibit, like I was being judged by the person that I went out with at that particular time. Vulnerability is something that I struggle with. I'm not ashamed to admit it. And a lot of us too struggle with it because we are taught to be brave, we are taught to be strong, we are taught to be not to show our emotion. And again, as women in the workplace, you have a lot to prove and to show for yourself. Like, you don't want people and your colleagues to look down on you or say, oh, she's a woman, she's being overly emotional, or oh, because she's a woman, she's weak, she will condone XYZ. We always try to put up that brave, courageous face at work, in business, in wherever it is. And when the cracks show that we cry out of anger, because I cry when I'm angry, and I hate myself at those moments, because when I'm angry and I'm trying to pass across a point, the tears start falling and I feel like, oh my God, they would think I'm weak, but I'm angry. I'm just trying to communicate the way I'm feeling, and this thing, I'm being passionate about it right now, but the tears are falling and they will misunderstand and they will think I'm weak. I don't know if anyone feels that way, but it happens to me on some occasions. So vulnerability, I don't know if we will ever be able to overcome vulnerability. Oh my God. I don't know if we'll be able to ever overcome, I don't know if we'll be able to ever overcome vulnerability in our lives, but we just have to keep putting ourselves out there. I remember when I was trying to make a new friend at work some years back, and I had read Brene Brown's book as well, which was talking about vulnerability as well. And she was like, friendship requires that you be vulnerable. And that's not the same way she said it, but that was my interpretation at the time. So I'm a very private person, and I've always said that people make friends with me. I don't make friends with people. But I took up that challenge and I started like sharing little things, like not private things, but I just started sharing observations. Oh, when I was coming today, I saw this. Or when I was listening to this music, I did this. When I was watching this, I saw this. And I realized that the more I shared about the mundane things that were happening around me, not necessarily personal stuff, the way I was feeling, the way the music was making me feel, my mood that day, my pain, was I feeling uncomfortable and all, the more we became friends, because I started sharing, she started sharing, we started knowing things about each other. And we did build a very friendly rapport during my stay at that particular place with my colleague. And it is true that vulnerability builds friendships, vulnerability builds relationship, but the caveat is knowing who to be vulnerable with. People need to earn that. For me, I needed that friendship because I spent majority of my time at the office. I needed someone that I could relate with and be friendly with and like let off steam with. I needed that to be able to function in that office. And I'd seen the characteristics of this person. I was like, okay, she looked like a nice person. She looked like the kind of person that I would like around me. And then I, started to try to be friendly. If she had pushed back, I would have stayed away, right? So vulnerability is about picking the right people, picking the right person, knowing what to share part-time, knowing where to share part-time. And when she says that vulnerability in leadership, I feel called out there because I need to be vulnerable as a leader. I need to be vulnerable as a leader. How did she put it? She said, remembering that leaders don't have all the answers, but ask important questions. Yeah, I agree. There was a time in my experience that I felt like I needed to have all the answers as the leader. But as I grew in leadership, I started realizing that if I had all the answers, then what are my teammates supposed to do? They are brilliant individuals as well. They need to show up and they need to bring of themselves to the table. So I found that my leadership style started changing to like, what do you want to do? How do you want to approach this? I would offer advice. I would offer my thoughts around it and say, this is why I'm thinking about it, but how do you want to approach this? What are your thoughts about that? And I realized that it helped them be more confident in their decisions and take more action and take initiative for their action. But I think the one that made me feel called out here is this paragraph. In my most recent research on courage and leadership, the ability to embrace vulnerability emerged as the prerequisite for all the daring leaders. If we can't handle uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure in a way that aligns with our values and furthers our organizational goals, we can't lead. I try as much as possible to avoid risk. I do not like risk. I like calculated risk. I need to know, again, back to my controlling behavior and uncertainty, right? I need to know as much of the outcome as possible. I need to have played all the scenarios in my head to be able to move forward. I'm unlearning that, but that's who I am, and that's I'm coming to accept that this is who I am, and I need to, grow out of it. But I'm called out because she said, if I want to be a daring leader, if I want to make the right leadership decisions and grow my team and empower my team, I need to not fear uncertainty. I need to not fear risks. I should dare. I should aspire for more. Too many lessons, too many things I have learned today. I've learned about, overwhelm and worry and stress and anxiety and fear and the role that they all play in either relationships, in connections, building connections with people, showing up as your right self and showing up for the people around you. So if there's anything you will take out of this, at least my lesson today from chapter 1 of the Atlas of the Heart, chapter 1, is I need to not be so afraid of the uncertainty. I need to find a way to deal with that. I need to accept that there are things that are outside of my control. And it's in the acceptance of the things that are out of my control that I can let go of the reins a bit. I can stop avoiding and not live in anxiety. And I have known the right language now for my anxiety states. So I have states of anxiety. I'm not an anxious person. And I have shared with you how I, deal with my worry. I hope you find it. If you know of any other way to deal, if there's any coping mechanism you have or anything that you use, feel free to share. Let's rub minds, and we are all learning and growing from this experience. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope you enjoyed our chapter 1 reading of Atlas of the Heart. I will see you next week, as we explore chapter 2. What's chapter 2? Let's see. Chapter 2 is places we go when we compare. This is going to be good. It's going to be talking about comparison, admiration, reverence, envy, jealousy, resentment, feudis. I need to go and learn how to say this word before next week. Schadenfreude and Freudenfreude. Anyway, I'll see you next week for chapter 2 of Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. And try to let's just not go through the process. Let's be conscious as we go through the week until the next time, and, bring in this new knowledge that we've learned around how to language our emotions, how to call ourselves out and know when we are overwhelmed and say, okay, I'm overwhelmed. I need not to make any decision right now. I need to take time out to rest and be away from people for about 10 minutes, which is the rule. Just take 10 minutes by yourself with your thoughts, decompress, and come back out. And then be vulnerable, but be mindful of who you are vulnerable with. Because vulnerability opens us up to relationships and with the people around us. I'll see you next time. Bye.